So how ready is the UK to cope with a no-deal Brexit? To discuss that, I'm joined in the studio by Richard Burnett, who is the Chief Executive of the Road Haulage Association, Layla McCay, Director of International Relations at the NHS Confederation, and from Gloucester by Minette Batters, President of the National Farmers Union. Let's start with you, Minette. Loving the cows in the background, by the way, look very busy. How prepared are we for a no-deal Brexit?
Well, there's just a limit in farming as to how prepared you can be. To a certain extent, you just have to face whatever is coming. But, you know, we've said from absolutely day one that a no deal is catastrophic for our industry. The last thing we want to see is panic buying. You know, people have been very clear that there shouldn't be any panic buying, there shouldn't be any hoarding, but people should prepare. But it's really difficult to know actually how you prepare. You know, we're totally reliant on free and frictionless trade with the EU. But of course, a lot of our critical dependencies, our fertilisers, our seeds, our animal medicines. You know, 95% of our animal medicines and vaccines are produced in the EU. So, you know, this is a whole animal welfare situation. It is really challenging to know how you can prepare, but we keep telling our farmers they've got to be looking at their businesses, they've got to be making sure they are Brexit ready, whatever that might mean.
Minette mentioned there the number of animal medicines that are produced in the EU. Layla, I mean, for human medicines, I guess this is an absolutely critical situation as well.
Absolutely. Every month, 37,000 patient packs of medicines come from the EU into the UK, and these are, of course, incredibly important areas of the health sector in preparing for a no-deal Brexit is what will we do if those are delayed. And the health sector is working absolutely flat out. The stockpiling plans are in place. But this is really going to come down to, can we get those medicines and medical devices across the borders? I
mean, when I spoke to the Health Secretary, he was saying that actually it should be OK, that they have got the plans in place to make sure that the medicines do get to the right people. I mean, are you confident?
I'm confident that the Department of Health has good plans in place for stockpiling and making sure that the medicines that are in the country get to the right people.
Biggest bar of fridges, we hear.
Well, what I'm less confident about is the plans that are in place in terms of bringing medicines into the country, in terms of the roll-on, roll-off freight that we hear about. We hear that as long as everybody does what they're supposed to do, it will be fine. But we think that there's sufficient uncertainties that at this stage in the game, there is a risk of endangerment to patients' lives in the case of a no-deal Brexit.
We're talking now about the movement of goods, medicines in and out of the country. I mean, this is what you are absolutely focused on. How have your communications been with the government?
Frustrating, I think very, very frustrating, and frustrating for some time. And you know, one of the things that I said this week was that we had been asking for a contingency plan back in December of 2017 with DFT and with Chris Grayling, and he said to me, look, don't worry about it, we'll get a deal, there's nothing to be concerned about. And here we are 6 weeks away, you know, from potentially a no deal, and we have no clarity as an industry in terms of, you know, what do we need to do to prepare? We had the permit issue this week where permits were allocated to hauliers, an oversubscription, and therefore a high proportion of international hauliers unable to go to Europe unless we get access. So we've got 6 weeks to try and nail that with the EU. Not definite. And then the customs process as well. There is no clarity over the customs process. You know, business are trying to prepare, but what for? And, you know, in terms of the scale of this, both from a UK perspective and a European perspective, those queues are going to be inevitable in a no-deal situation.
And how big are these queues are we talking about?
Well, so if you look at you know, the issues in and around Kent, the French have said we're ready for a no-deal situation, but you know what they've left out in terms of the picture is saying that no vehicle will get onto a ferry in Dover unless it's got the appropriate documentation. We're expecting businesses to make sure that in 6 weeks' time they know exactly what they're filling out in terms of customs, transit documentation, and that they're ready to do that. The scale of this is just colossal, and business isn't ready to put those processes and procedures in place. So we're going to see queues, you know, a 4-minute check will create a queue of 30, 40 miles.
Miles, that really does hammer it home, actually. Minette Batters, Have you received the clarity that you need from the government?
No, we haven't, and nor has the food industry. I mean, our industry is the largest manufacturing sector, as you know, bigger than cars and aerospace put together, worth £113 billion to the economy. And it's fair to say, for food businesses, you know, this is just costing millions and millions of pounds in preparation. We're predominantly foreign-owned processing, so the Irish, the Dutch have big businesses here, as well as the Danes, a lot of European employment. No certainty on seasonal workers. You know, and I think people tend to forget the size of this market. You know, 66 million people in the UK. We produce 60% of the food that we eat in this country. And to be at this stage when we have been promised certainty, where we have no clarity, just this will to push us to the cliff edge. It would go as far as say it is breaking some businesses, and we really need the certainty. We've been promised that no deal would not happen, and we look to be marching ever closer towards it. And the cost, you know, the cost to this industry at the moment is absolutely terrifying.
Layla McCay, I want to really focus a bit on people who rely on medicines, because I think there's many of our viewers will be worried, to say the least, about what is happening in a no-deal Brexit. You hear these kind of concerning reports. You're worried for your own health, perhaps your family's health. Is there any reason for people to be worried, or actually are things more reassuring than perhaps we sometimes portray?
I think it's a mixed picture. Sudden termination of long-term collaborations in medicines, devices, public health, research, getting healthcare overseas cannot be good for patients. But really, when we're thinking about things like medicines and care, the NHS is used to coping with emergencies, but that doesn't mean we need to create them.
So is it an emergency?
So the NHS is preparing to go into emergency mode in the case of a no-deal Brexit. And we have these stockpiled medicines in place. We're starting to stockpile the devices. There are plans in place, but really all of this is contingent on all the different parts of the sector, all the different parts of transport, of DEFRA, of all these different parts working together really well.
What does emergency mode mean?
Emergency mode means that there's a big focus on who's doing what, where the medicines are coming from, things like being open 24 hours a day to receive medical device deliveries, things like figuring out who needs medicines where in the country and how to make that happen. There's all sorts of in place, and there's all sorts of structures that are being developed in the NHS to try to make sure that this doesn't harm patients as much as possible. But at this stage, it's very hard to guarantee.
Okay, and then just finally, Richard, what would your message be to the government?
We need clarity. We need clarity quickly in terms of what these processes need to be. You know, if I go back to the customs process, we've got safety and security declarations that need to be completed, which the government is insisting that's going to put an enormous burden. You know, if you look at one of our members that ships in 3,000 loads a week, one load has got 8,000 consignments on per truck. That's going to take 180 people 8 hours to process one truck. How's that practical and possible? And how are we going to gear up in the time that's left? We need clarity, and we need it quickly. OK,
Richard Bennett, Layla McCay and Minette Batters, who's in Salisbury, I'm told, not Gloucester, so apologies for mislocating.